Aloha and welcome back to SUP FM. My name's Simon Hutchinson, and in the SUP FM podcast every week I chat to people who can inspire and add to your experience of stand-up paddleboarding. What you'll find in every episode is a conversation with someone who's either done something incredible in SUP or who can offer you some learning, insights and help which can add something to your time on the water. We want to say a big thank you to this show's sponsor over at Starboard. Starboard is the leading innovator in SUP and has a huge history in board and paddle design. And way back in episode 71, I talked to Sven Rasmussen, the creator of the brand. He started by producing windsurfing boards in 1994, and the success of his innovative designs led to the brand developing into the market leader in only 10 years. Starboard got behind stand-up paddling early and has supported the sport ever since. They continue to innovate on the environmental front and improve and push the boundaries of design and functionality, which makes their boards and paddles perfect for the weekend warriors like me, as well as the explorers and adventurers like one of our previous guests, Cal Major. And you can find out more about Starboard through their website, which is linked to in the show notes. You can catch up with SUP FM podcast in plenty of places, including Instagram and on Facebook. But if you wanted to keep it old school, you could sign up to our SUP FM email newsletter, which goes out with a whole lot of value-added updates. And if you do sign up, then as a thank you, you also get our bonus free guide to our favourite apps that we use on the water to keep us safe and informed. And you can subscribe by heading over to our website, supfmpodcast.com. This week I chat with Ben Longhurst, who is the Technical Director of the Water Skills Academy, which is an organisation based in the UK and which covers a whole load of bases. They run expeditions and holidays across the world. They run SUP industry events and in-person events to inspire and keep paddlers informed. And they were particularly active during the first UK lockdowns with some webinars which are still available and which certainly kept my morale up and which are linked to in the show notes. The biggest thing that WSA do is to offer courses and to certify instructors across general instruction, adventure guiding, surfing, lifesaving and a number of other areas. And the topic of instructors isn't something that we've previously covered on the podcast. And while there are some clear benefits to getting coaching, whatever your level, there are also real benefits to becoming an instructor. Because even if you only coach the occasional lesson like me, you don't necessarily do it to earn $1 million, but you do it because it's a really fun thing to do. It certainly feels very good to play a role introducing extra people into the sport, and it also helps me to learn a lot about the sport which I wouldn't have learned if I wasn't passing information over to others. Ben is also an experienced adventurer in his own right, so we do talk a bit about his experience descending the world's deepest gorge in Nepal by SUP and his love for the west coast of Scotland. So a big welcome to the Water Skills Academy's Technical Director, Ben Longhurst. Hey Ben, welcome to SUP FM.
Hi Simon, massive thanks for having me on and representing WSA. It's a true honour to be here. You know, I listen to the podcast. I'm a avid listener, and the guests you've had on, and truly amazing. So quite humbled when you asked me to come on. So thank you very much.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure, and we're humbled to have you on and to talk about all your fantastic work in WSA, the Water Skills Academy. And something that we haven't done before is to talk about instructors and providing that sort of service, providing SUP skills and knowledge from the perspective of an organisation who provides that knowledge and certifies instructors. And as we discussed off air before this, there's a whole alphabet soup of different organisations, some which operate across international boundaries and some that are specific to individual countries who provide those standards for instructors. So what it would be great to discuss, amongst other things, is why people should get the services of an instructor in the first place. And also some of the things that I've discovered from being an instructor, which is how it helps to add a whole new added dimension to your paddling experience. And of course, the organisation you represent, Water Skills Academy, have been really innovative, particularly about how you've spread your expertise across the paddling community. And also what's been impressive is your collaborations with other organisations and your, I don't know what the collective noun is for ambassadors. Is it stable or something like that? But it's a very impressive collection of individuals, and some of those people we've had on the show already. And also, it'd be great to get your view on the growth of the sport over the last couple of years. But before we get to talk about instruction and instructors and all of that stuff, it's always good to get a picture of how you got your start in water sport and adventure sport. So, were you one of those kids that was always outdoors?
Yeah, I was. And I think maybe it was the age. I was sort of the year of 1972. And it was sort of slung out at an early age to go and play in the coal bunker or out in the garden or, in the woods as you grew up. So, yeah, absolutely. I've been, outdoors from an early age, and that was always encouraged. I think that one thing I was encouraged to do really early in life was to swim. I was taught to swim quite an early age, and I think that's held me in good stead all the way through my life so far. And I think it's a skill that is a life skill. I think that everyone should learn, globally. So very, very lucky and important being able to do that.
And I think we're probably of a similar vintage. And your story about playing in the coal scuttle, building sites used to be my favoured place where I used to play, which obviously comes with a massive health warning. But luckily we all survived with the odd trip to A&E for stitches and various other things. So how did you get your start in water sports?
I guess, it was really swimming that gave me that opportunity. I swam, as I say, from quite an early age, and then sort of went into competitive swimming. I swam competitively for a number of years, training before school, after school, competing on weekends. And I can't remember what age I was, but I kind of remember going to the pool one evening and had a break and saying to my mum, that's kind of it, I've had enough. And she said, well, that's fine. What are you going to do? And I remember it being a Monday, and I got home, told my dad, and he was the one who'd been driving us. And he said, well, there's a lifeguard session, beach lifeguards in the pool on a Monday night. So went along, saw some friends that I'd met swimming, and that was it, really. Joined Pink Bay and Scare Lifeguard Club, competed surf swimming, board paddling, ski paddling, well into my teens. And it was a time when, there weren't many surfers around, but took up surfing and knew everyone in the water at that time in my local beach, Rest Bay. There was about 10 of us. So that my passion for the water continued, and certainly the sea then being part of that for all those years. So, yeah, it was the passion continues.
And when did you first encounter SUP?
I first saw it actually. My wife and I, Sarah, we were away on a trip luckily enough, in California, and we were walking along a beach and saw this guy paddle this board across. And I'm not sure what I thought actually. I probably thought that'll never catch on, but it was absolutely incredible. And being being a paddler and a surfer, it was like, that's truly amazing, Came back to the UK, and I was in my local surf spot, and a really good friend of mine who isn't around anymore, actually, he's passed away. He was on a stand-up, catching waves, asked me if I wanted to have a go, fell off, and absolutely fell in love with it. So really lucky seeing it, and then lucky that my mate Paul bought a board quite early on, and I was able to have a go.
Absolutely, and now it's rife and all over the place, isn't it? It's incredible. So, just I know you've been on a number of expeditions, and you've travelled to some pretty incredible places, including Nepal and, even our own west coast of Scotland. Just tell me a bit about some of those adventures and expeditions that you've been on.
Yeah, it sort of started quite early, really. I left school just after I was 16, didn't really get on with school. And at that time, there was an outdoor ed course in Newbury, Berkshire, of all places, that ran a year's outdoor education. It was run by a guy called Stuart Wagstaff, who taught me how to kayak and canoe. Stuart was one of the early British explorer paddlers that did a lot of first ascents in the Himalayas, paddled a lot in the States and Canada. And from there, I moved up to Scotland for a couple of years to work in an outdoor centre there, met a load more amazing people, all inspirational characters, surrounded by them. And they talked about these far off lands, going kayaking away for a month. And, in those days, there were no guidebooks. It was sort of arrive and explore, first ascents, etc. So I sort of kept that in my mind. And in 93, I led my first expedition to Nepal. It was a Welsh student kayak expedition. I'd gone back to college. And it was basically a month of paddling rivers in Nepal, and it was absolutely fantastic. 10-day multi-day trips, living out of kayaks, sleeping on beaches, and I was absolutely hooked.
And you returned to Nepal, didn't you, in 2017? Because you led the first SUP defence of the Kali Gandaki.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I can pronounce Annapurna, which is one of the mountains which is on one side. Just tell us a bit about that, because that sounds incredibly special.
Yeah, so I guess I went back and forth to Nepal quite a lot in the 90s, and I went back sort of every year for month-long periods of paddling, and interspersed with that, I did some other trips to Siberia and a couple of other places that were incredible. And I'd always wanted to go back to Nepal, and it was a promise I made to my wife. I said, look, one day I'll take you there. Certainly a special place, special people. And chatting with an old friend of mine, Ant Eads Davis, and we said, well, why don't we run a stand-up paddleboard trip there, take some clients. Most people to that point had either gone to the Himalayas for trekking, climbing, or whitewater kayaking, and to go there to look for an easy river, flat as we could get it. We kind of knew where there was one, so yeah, we headed off with a great group, and led the first descent of the Kali Gandaki.
Did that get hairy? Presumably there was all the planning. As an instructor, leader of this expedition, you'd done all of your due diligence in advance. Were there any hairy moments or particular challenges there?
Yeah, I mean, traveling in a country like Nepal is tough, from the road system to the flights. We took 2 internal flights. So it's not an easy place to travel, but that's part of the adventure for me. It's always been about the whole journey, not about doing a particular section of water. So yeah, we did our planning. Ant had been back and forth quite a lot, and spent a lot of time there after the earthquake, helping local communities. So Ant's really well connected. I had some old contacts there. We actually did it as a supported expedition or trip with a company called Paddle Nepal. And again, a bit strange from them to be going to paddle a reasonably flat water river. So it was great. We could paddle empty boards all day and then get off in the night and have food around a fire with a Nepalese raft guide. So yeah, it was a fantastic adventure.
As you said, Nepal's had a pretty tough time. There was that huge earthquake. I think, was that 2015 or something?
Yeah.
Something around about that time. And I think during this current COVID crisis, they've also found it particularly tough because the economy is so dependent on tourists. And of course, there hasn't been anyone out there. We tend to forget how this crisis has affected all of those areas. Nepal is just beautiful, and the people are just incredible, aren't they?
I think the people for me, kind of make Nepal. They're absolutely incredibly kind people. They haven't got a lot, or if anything, and that the kindness they show, travelers, tourists, and their own is pretty incredible, really. It was a bit of sort of bittersweet, really, doing the Kaligandaki again in 90. I think it was 90. Might have been 94, 95. I did a long descent of it from the upper Kaligandaki down into the lower Kaligandaki, and sort of as you come into the lower section, there's a small gorge with 3 class 3 rapids. It kind of separates the upper section to the lower. And it was free flowing. Going back in 2017, the river had been dammed. So for hydropower, controversially, as most rivers in the Himalaya are the big river sources. So yeah, it was lovely to be back there. Lovely to be paddling again in Nepal, but quite sad to see a big dam and to have to put on underneath it.
One of the characteristics, I guess we should explain, is that the thing that makes this particularly special is it's so deep. It's one of the deepest gorges in the world, and Annapurna is the 10th highest mountain in the world. So it's a pretty spectacular bit of geology there.
Yeah, and a very holy river as well, where it meets, comes into the delta at the bottom of the Nepalese-Indian border. It's a very holy river.
So moving back into sort of more domestic waters, your second home, I guess, is the west coast of Scotland. It's an area that I've spent quite a bit of time. Just talk to me about some of the areas that you've paddled around there and some of your highlights of Scotland.
Yeah, again, I guess kind of been lucky with, the people I've met and people I've paddled with and the areas. I think, I've been fortunate to paddle in many places around the world, and people ask me all the time, where's your favourite place? And, for me, number one is the west coast of Scotland. It really is. It's a truly magical place. It's the weather can change. There's quite big tides in some areas. On the coastal stretches, some great rivers, huge inland lochs, which can create their own challenges and beauty. And the wildlife, again, is truly inspirational. Golden eagle, white-tailed eagles, otters, porpoise. The list goes on. And to spend time there, either as a family or with clients guiding, it's certainly a highlight of the year for me.
In the beaches particularly, you could, if it wasn't for the temperature of the water, you'd think you were maybe in the Caribbean or somewhere. Those white sandy beaches are just incredible, aren't they?
Yeah, phenomenal. And again, the people, Simon, if you in the motor areas on the west coast, I think things have changed a little, I think, with with a lot more tourists around, people staycationing in vans and things like that. But at the heart of those West Coast communities are the people. And they're very welcoming, incredibly kind, and to spend time in their company as well. And we always make sure we give back on our trips back into the smaller communities. It just makes that experience, a little bit more special.
So let's just move on and talk about another great passion, which I know you have, which is SUP surfing. I personally am on record saying that SUP surfing has ruined me for flat water paddling. Whenever there's the slightest sniff of a bit of swell, and we don't get much swell down here on the south coast, but at the second areas, we're up at sort of God knows what time and out on the water, and it's just such an incredible thrill. Just talk to me a bit about SUP surfing, because you made it from prone surfing, proper surfing as people say, to SUP surfing. How was that transition, and how did you get hooked by it?
I'm really grateful for it, actually. I surfed, like I said earlier on, from a young age, when wetsuits were pretty non-existent or horrific. And there weren't many of them around, certainly not like they are now. And I competed a little bit in shortboarding, not very well, got knocked out of most first heats. And as I got older, I got into longboard surfing, and again, competed a little bit in that, not very well, same again. And I've had a run of spells of spinal surgery, 4 surgeries, and each time I came back, I would, get back in the water, surf again, and then sort of just realised that, the pop up might be not helping my back at all, and transitioned into stand-up paddleboard surfing, and it saved me. Saved my sort of, I wouldn't call it a career, certainly saved my my surfing, that I still get in the water, can still catch waves, and still enjoy the time with friends in the surf.
Yeah, it's definitely changed my life. I came to it very late from a very much a dry land athletic, and again, career, I put in quotation marks there, but yeah, I absolutely love it. So with your instructor's hat on, if there was anyone listening who wanted to start SUP surfing, or just to build up those basic skills on the board in order to prepare them for SUP surfing, what would be those sort of constituent parts you would suggest that people work on?
I think a good level of a reasonable level of flat water, choppy water paddling ability, because in surf, even though it might look clean, with a long spell between 2 waves, there's the water may be a little bit aerated, or even if it's not very big, you need to keep the board pointing in certain directions at times. So, yeah, a reasonable paddling ability. Do some research into areas that you can go that have got a wave that are reasonably safe. There's so much information now on Magic Seaweed and surf report sites, and go to an area that hasn't got many surfers around, because at some point you're going to fall off. You've got a large board, long leash, and a paddle in your hand. But of course, go somewhere that's safe, maybe a lifeguarded area or something like that. I mean, realistically, I would say go and get a lesson. I mean, that I think it probably become clear a bit later, but I think going to get a lesson gives you that foot up. You should leave a lesson, knowing a little bit about some safety, where to go, a little bit about equipment, so it prepares you to go on to your next adventure or your next time in the surf. And again, maybe not the popping up side of stuff for stand-up surfing is maybe go and get a surf lesson as well, because ride it once you've caught a wave, riding the wave is all exactly the same as you would normally surfing. So don't overlook that.
It's all about cross training, isn't it? Just extending your skills in those directions. One thing that a lot of beginners who express an interest to SUP surf don't have, in my experience, is that ability just to move around the board. And for me, that's one of those key skills. You've really got to be comfortable, treading up and down the board. And sometimes that takes a bit of time, and it takes a bit of falling in order to get your head around that and to get your body attuned to the different movement of the board.
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on there. It's that, be comfortable, and you'll enjoy it, I think, a lot more, rather than just battling all the time to to try and catch a wave that you might not catch, and even that progression from flat water through to paddling a bit in choppy water, turning a board in choppy water. They're all skills that are going to equip you and help you later on if you're paddling on a bit of coastline or a choppy loch in Scotland. So yeah, all important stuff.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Water Skills Academy, and how did that get started? Because you were one of the founders, weren't you, of that?
Yeah, it was sort of going back in time again to around just pre-2014. A couple of years before that, I was managing an outdoor centre in Cardiff, and decided that we'd buy a fleet of stand-up paddleboards. At the time, you could only get hardboards, inflatables. I think there was one on the market with C4. And when we bought them, I was lucky enough to come across Steve and Mandy West. They came to the centre, did some training with myself and a few other coaches there, and just left inspired. They kept in touch with them, and as the organisation they were working for at the time grew, which was the ASI, they asked myself and one of the other founders, Chris Ray, to become trainers, which we did for a number of years, and some other great trainers there as well. Paul Byrne, I think, who still works for the ASI, is really, really great guy. And then through one thing and another, we just decided that Steve and Mandy had left the ASI, Chris was leaving, and I kind of thought it was probably my time to leave as well as a trainer. And reasonably quickly, we decided that we should do something ourselves. And we headed off, formed the WSA, and wrote the manuals, wrote the courses, and it was WSA was born.
So in terms of your specialisms, because you've got, not surprisingly with your background, a very well established sort of adventuring sort of expedition level of certification, but just tell us what else you do, because you do surf lifesaving as well, don't you?
Yeah, well, sort of combined with Steve and Mandy, Chris and myself, at that time, it was quite a good collection of experience, knowledge and skills. I had a surfing background, adventuring background. Steve and Mandy sort of, most people will know their background. And Chris is a, surfer, very, very good surfer, surf lifesaving trainer, of high level of pedigree. And so everything sort of complemented itself when we were pulling all the courses together. So outside of our sort of set of basic courses, not basic, probably the wrong term, outside of our initial courses, we do specialize in surf lifeguard training, surf coach safety and rescue training, surf coach training, and then the sort of eclectic mix of all the other disciplines that come with stand-up paddleboarding.
So just moving on into we'll talk a bit more about WSA a bit later on, but just to talk generally now about instructors. Obviously, as we're all aware, there's been a fantastic increase in stand-up paddleboarding over the last couple of years now. I mean, it was fast growing when we started this podcast in 2015, but it's really skyrocketed over the last couple of years, particularly. And I know one of the areas of engagement with stand-up paddleboarders, which I guess is a sort of Marmite type experience for people listening internationally. What that means in the UK is you either love it or you hate it, is the whole experience of Facebook groups and the number of Facebook instructors we have out there offering everyone advice about this, that, and the other. And I've got to the point now where I just try and avoid it, because a lot of this information is all is well intentioned and some is dangerous. What's your view on that whole Facebook engagement sup experience?
I think firstly, it's, where is there a sport or activity in the world that has grown and captured the world of all ages, male, female, young and old, like stand-up paddleboarding has? And I'd be hard pressed to find one, I think. And I think with that comes a lot of excitement, a lot of passion. And undoubtedly then that'll spill over into, people trying to, doing their best to help someone out, whether that be in a car park, chatting with them about, maybe a leash, or whether that be on a Facebook group, trying to give some advice on, where to go paddling or clothing. So I think first and foremost, I think it's all really well intended. I think the trouble is that, I guess the risk is that with some of that, some of the questions that are posed, there is a risk maybe attached to some of the things. And I would always suggest that people sort of default back to one of the specialist organizations, and it doesn't have to be WSA. You can, you don't have to come to us. We're not certainly not preaching things. Go to the ASI, go to Be Super, those specialist groups with specialist trainers that have been around for a long time. and gain information from either from their HQs or from their instructors, their schools. So that's kind of my suggestion. How we deal with it? Well, like you, I try not to get too involved because, like you, I'm passionate about stand-up paddleboarding and certainly the progression for people to learn well and safely. And we kind of just default back to posting either some of the webinars that we did during lockdown, some of the articles that we've written, blogs, or point people in the direction of people who we trust and admire, whether that be Steve West's book or Palm Equipment's latest release of a quick release belt, for example, or something along those lines. And industry professionals.
And there's lots of information out there, and I'm glad that you touched on your webinars because I very much enjoyed those. I mean, you had a stellar guest list for that. Are they still available?
Yeah, so they were an absolute scream to make because neither Chris or I had a clue what we were doing to start with. So it was all it was entertaining from the start. And yeah, they're all available on the WSA YouTube. We've spoken about everything with Matt Barker and Ben Pye, from foiling to technique to boards to adventuring to Sean did a closed session for ladies in paddle sport, and they're all available. Yeah,
and we'll link to your page on the show notes. So, what is your view on the growth of the sport over the last couple of years, and where do you see it going over the next couple?
What a really interesting question, and I honestly don't know. I don't know whether there'll be a slowdown this year or next year. I'm not sure. I chat with some manufacturers, and they're saying that hardboard orders are going up, which is, I think, is a great thing. So maybe people are specializing a little bit more. I think those people that stay with it will maybe get back surfing, which will pick that back up again. And hopefully, get into adventuring and seeing wild places and going off having their own adventures.
And there's a real opportunity, for those of us who are within the industry. And I think that's shared across yourselves, WSA, what we do with this podcast and the manufacturers, to just keep sharing that information and keep inspiring people. And there's some core information which I sort of repeat endlessly, and actually some of it I've nicked from Steve West from our session, and particularly the really important part that he raised, which is, people endlessly give advice about which board do I buy, generally inflatable one. But the key information he gave was the most important part is the paddle. And those aluminium paddles are probably the things that potentially can turn people off paddling, because they're adapted kayak paddles and they really don't do the job. So people do get fixated with the sort of boards they get. I think generally they're not that bad, unless there's a huge weight disparity between your body weight and what the board can take. But that paddle is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, and again, like you just said it there. One of the first conversations I ever had with Steve was about paddles, because we're the first 12 boards that I ever bought. Along came these humongous paddles. It was like a weightlifting bar trying to use them. So yeah, wholeheartedly recommend, a more, a paddle made by one of the subspecialists. So whether that be Starboard, Blackfish paddles, research a little bit and go to one of those paddle manufacturers. And again, we're always here to help. We don't charge for advice like this. Give us a shout and we'll point you in in a direction that we think will help.
And you're right about those old school paddles, because they were absolutely massive, and not surprising, most people, or certainly the racers, ended up getting really bad shoulder problems from using them. Size is no guarantee of quality in terms of paddle head size. Generally, people are going small, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I paddle with a really it's sold as a ladies paddle, but it's I think it's amazing. It's got a really small blade, loads of flex in the shaft, and because of my back, it suits me, and especially on, for me, I've got luckily enough to have a couple of paddles. I've got a longer one that I'll tour with and guide with, so I'm stood up a little bit more, and then I've got a shorter paddle which I'll use for surfing. So I use the same. It's the same shaped blade, and I just find it easier on my body, and my back allows me to stay out in the water a bit longer.
Yeah, so we've taken a slight diversion into paddles, and I can't help but feel partly responsible for that conversation. But we were talking about the growth of the sport over the last couple of years and where you see it going. And it's interesting you say about the transition into hardboards, because really that is, the natural progression, or tends to be the natural progression from beginners to the sport, because you start off on your Red 10.6 if you're lucky enough to have that, or other brands are available, and then you start to specialize and start to work into those other disciplines. And talking to Tez from SupMag UK quite some time ago now, he was very much of the view that adventuring and exploring and so on was the next massive growth area for stand-up paddle. Did you share his views on that one, albeit the fact that he gave his opinion about, 18 months ago?
Yeah, I think so, and I certainly hope so. I think, like I said earlier on, I'm hard-pressed to find a sport, and also use the word activity, that's captured so many people. This year, we were lucky enough to work with and guide a series of West Coast Scotland trips. They were all female trips, and made up of really inspirational women who had paddled a little bit and wanted to take their paddling a little bit further, go adventuring into the wilderness. And I think they all, it was a guided trip, so obviously we were looking after them, but I think they all left with that sort of drive and desire to go back out and maybe change a board, buy some dry bags, and get back out there into the wilderness and explore themselves.
It's incredible, the female adventuring, because obviously Cal Major is one of your ambassadors, and Fiona Quinn were the first ones to go Land's End to John O'Groats, and it wasn't until Jordan Wiley that there was a large GB mileage expedition out there. So women definitely set the standards in terms of that early adventuring, and it's great to have more women out there doing those sorts of trips.
Oh yeah, I mean, and go back a little bit before that with Sian as well. Sian Sykes paddling around Wales. What role models? Absolutely, outstanding within an industry that's and a sport activity that's predominantly made up of females. It's what ambassadors and inspirational leaders that those ladies are. It's we're lucky to have those characters and those leaders to look up to and inspire us to get out on the water. They certainly make me want to get out. I don't know whether you saw Cal's post of her trip when she was up on the West Coast, and those orcas popped up alongside her. It just brought a tear to my eye, actually. I just thought, how inspiring is that, coast of Britain, and she's out there doing it up there. Amazing.
Just coming back to Sian Sykes and her circumnavigation of Wales, that is a gritty old trip. If you haven't listened to that episode with Sian, then I'll link to that in the show notes. She tells a great story about escaping a firing range in the Bristol Channel by a matter of minutes. She did it the right way because she was patient and she planned it properly. And I think that is the thing that, potentially blokes can get too carried away with the macho aspects of it, and I'm going to push on through. And generally that's when you tend to get yourself into trouble.
Yeah, I think if anyone ever gets a chance to go and listen to Sian or Cal speak, you'll you'll certainly see the level of planning, preparation, knowledge, experience that goes into those big trips. And I'm not saying the blokes haven't done it, but just going back to that sort of role model, for other ladies and blokes out there, that's the way to do a big trip like that. They've really got it dialed in.
Just moving back to instruction, there are a lot of conversations that go on about the value of instruction and whether or not people can do it on their own or whether or not they need guidance or whether they need lessons. And obviously people are entirely at liberty to follow whatever strategy they want. But there are some real advantages, aren't there, from having sessions with instructors, particularly in those early stages. Just talk me through some of the main advantages that having an instructor's session early on can give to you.
Yeah, I think, again, it's like I said earlier, it's going back to that, go to a specialist SUP organization or a school or club that's been affiliated by one of those organizations. Obviously great if you go to a WSA one. And you should really, after a lesson, you should leave standing up confidently. You should leave knowing about safety, knowing a little bit about kit and equipment, probably where to go paddling, what to do next. And I think that is gets you on that first rung of the ladder. So you leave feeling confident, happy, and inspired to come back and have another go with a coach or, in a club, or whether you go off and buy a board, have a board and go out on your own. And I think, it is, really, really important that, you do that.
And there's also a cost consideration, isn't there? Because obviously tough times at the moment and people think, I don't want to spend the money to go and get a session. But actually that can be a bit of a false economy, can't it? Because if you end up developing poor habits or, you're not able to move around on your board or you paddle in a strange way, all of those things potentially can be addressed up front and mean that when you do go out on your board, you're far more prepared for conditions and you're less likely to stand there with your legs rigidly locked, with cramp all over the place and you're far more relaxed on your board. And that helps you to utilize your leisure sessions far more effectively. By the way, I don't expect you to disagree with any of this, but
yeah, it's all good.
That's my controversial view. So that's newbies and beginners, and obviously they get a benefit from instruction. But one of the things that surprised me when I took my B Super instruction, started teaching as part of a school, is how much pleasure I actually got from teaching people, even, an hour's taster session, the basic skills of SUP, and just seeing that real enjoyment on people's faces. And I'm not sure whether that's a buzz that ever dims. It hasn't so far. I mean, what's your feeling on that? Do you still feel that instructions added an additional benefit to your paddling life?
Yeah. Still, I still coach at the centre in Cardiff. I had a weekend of delivering courses, beginners courses, a couple of weeks ago. Absolutely loved it. And made sure they gave me a good review on TripAdvisor to make sure I didn't lose too much credibility with the other staff there. So I think I've got an absolute passion for it. So like yourself, that will always come across in your coaching, and then the sort of the other end is the guiding, and there's I absolutely love guiding in the wilderness environment with people who can paddleboard, people who intermediate paddleboarders, and just that whole journey of traveling on a stand-up in remote areas.
There's something about being on water and being on the wilderness which just delivers so many benefits to the mind, and I think that's one of the things that's really tied people into stand-up paddleboarding. I mean, I don't think it takes you long for it to get its hooks into you. Certainly that was my experience paddling on a very grey day with horizontal rain and a headwind. And that was my first introduction to the sport. And I loved it after that. So it doesn't take much to get its hooks into you. Just in terms of instruction and being an instructor, I think people deal with that qualification in a couple of ways. They either think, right, I now am an instructor, I've reached my Everest, and now I can deliver all these sessions forevermore. Or people see it as just the start of their SUP journey. And for me, my experience as an instructor is that I'm completely different to when it was when I first got my qualification. In that way, it's kind of a bit like passing your driving test, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's the same, for myself and, another guy who I work with a lot. We're always learning. And whether that be, learning from different groups you've got on the water, or whether you've gone off to do another course, watch someone else coach, read a book, whatever. It is a constant journey. I've just finished a project actually in Cardiff, working with some ladies from the local community, the BAME community in Cardiff. And we did an outrigger journey along a piece of coastline, and they trained for it for 10 weeks. And it was apart from being inspirational again for everyone involved, including myself, I learned so much about some different cultures, approaching certain things in different ways. Never stop learning. Yeah,
every day's a school day. So just moving back to WSA and some of your initiatives, because as I mentioned at the top of the show, you have been really innovative in terms of some of the things that you do. So one of the things is the women-only SUP collective, which you combine with Palm and Starboard. Just tell us a little bit about that initiative.
Yeah, well, that came around from actually the lockdown, well, pre-lockdown actually, but then the lockdown sort of webinar series that we did, and then the closed CPD sessions that we did. And when we look back at the demographic of, who were on those webinars, who was watching, who was asking the questions, it was, 90% female. And, we've got some amazing female coaches, female ambassadors. They outnumber the blokes. And we just thought, well, there's a lot of talk on social media, one thing and another. So what we decided to do was set up the Women's SUP Collective in partnership with Palm and Starboard. And we based it at a few select places around the UK, from the northeast down to Cornwall. We still haven't done the Scottish one yet. And unfortunately, we had to, only do a certain amount. It was a day of workshops led by some WSA female ambassadors and coaches, and some male ones, looking at some key things, questions that came out of the webinar. So SUP safety, clothing, equipment, and then some fun stuff like, intro to SUP surf. We did some river, some coastal, a bit of yoga where we could. And technique. So it went really well, and it's being planned for next year.
It's really good of you to join us as we record this, because coming up this weekend, so basically this event will have happened by the time this goes out, unfortunately, but you've got your symposium and trade event happening in Hayling Island, which is the stamping ground of Steve West, and also the area where windsurfing was created. Just tell us a bit about the symposium and the trade event that's happening in the next couple of days.
Yeah, so this Friday the 8th, we've got our paddle sport and board sport industry day based in Hayling Island. And the concept is that we support our schools, clubs, and anyone else who'd like to come along to listen to some inspirational speakers. And a bit I've missed out really is at the core of the Water Skills Academy right from the outset have been the environment and our message, and how we support and affect positive change. Being a 1% for the Planet business member, and also a B Corp. And we wanted to give back a little bit, a bit of education, if you like, and inspiration. So we've got Chris Hines, who MBE, who was one of the founders of Surfers Against Sewage. Professor Tim Marsh, who is a cultural health and safety speaker, great guy. We've got Julian Penny from Pharos Palm Equipment to doing a chat on their sort of supply chain and equipment and clothing, and then thankfully Charlie Head agreed to step in and caught him just in time to do a closing speech. So we're excited about that one. And then on the Saturday and Sunday, we do this every year, obviously apart from last year. We run a symposium, and that originally started where we wanted to offer all the WSA coaches and guides a weekend of CPD, so they stay current. And the reason why we did it that way was we don't think selling the same course that they have to come back and do every year is the right way to do it. So again, we get together all the WSA trainers, and for a weekend we run a series of workshops that people can buy into and use it for their CPD. So they're fresh when they leave, when they start next season, or if they continue working this winter, they've left with a bit of time for themselves. And like we said earlier on, a positive learning experience.
It's a fantastic weekend in Prospect, particularly Charlie Head. I think, he's been quite amazing in terms of his expeditions, and, he's been quite transparent about his struggles and so on. And we're hoping to get him on the show to talk about some of his expeditions. There's one that's actually still on Red Bull TV, which was where he descended a large section of the Amazon, which is quite an adventure and well worth checking out. But incredible guy. I can't say enough about him. And of course, he's been around Scotland as well, or part of it this summer, hasn't he?
Yeah, well, he finished off his round the UK trip. Yeah, that was his sort of his bits of his last leg to do, because he did stop for a while. So we're excited to hear about his circumnavigation, and it's worth mentioning actually, Simon, that if people see the industry day or symposium conference advertised ready for next year, then it's actually sold out this year. But for next year, you don't have to be a WSA member. You can be a coach from any organisation. It's open to everyone. So keep an eye on that. And if it's something you're interested in, then do book.
Well, that answers one of my questions, because I was wondering what the relationship was between all the various different certifying bodies. I was kind of imagining it being like West Side Story with the Jets and the Sharks and everyone dancing off or whatever. But clearly there are connections, and everyone supports or at least recognises everyone else.
Yeah, I think so. I think the bottom line for it all, when you look at those specialist sub organisations, everyone wants and is driving towards the same thing, and obviously to gather members and that always helps. But to leave people inspired, coached well, guided well by those qualifications and those coaches and guides. So we've always had the approach right from the beginning that we're an open door. If anyone wants to go on one of our courses, they can come along. We're not insisting on certain things. They can drop in and out as they like, because we see it as CPD and then those coaches and guides or general paddlers go off and they help everyone else. So we see it as a positive.
Well, Ben, thanks ever so much for your time. I really found that interesting to find out about WSA and also some of your expeditions. I'm sure we just skimmed the surface of all of that. Obviously, all of the information will be on the show notes, and we will build that out. But tell us where people can find out more about you and the WSA.
Yeah, so find out more about the Water Skills Academy is www.waterskillsacademy.com. And you can find out about all the coaching and guide courses on there, as well as our personal paddler courses. So we're not all about coaches and guides. There are holidays on there. And importantly, there's also not only our information, our safety information, but also where to go. So our schools and clubs are all listed, so you can find one in your area. And if you feel like it, pop along to one of those, and we know you'll get a really good service.
of course, there's all that information on YouTube, which you mentioned earlier, and which we will link to. Ben, thanks ever so much for your time. Great chatting, and hopefully we'll catch up at some point on the water.
Yeah, Simon, once again, really appreciate it. Really humbled asking me on.
Well, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed listening to Ben. And if you are looking to extend and expand your paddle experience and share your love of SUP by becoming an instructor, then the link to WSA is in the show notes. And just to say that there are other certifying bodies available, and there are lots in the UK like B Super, who I got my qualifications with. But if you're interested, then please give it a Google for your local certifying body in your own country, because it's a great way to extend your enjoyment of the sport into a different direction. Well, it's amazing that we're now heading towards our last 4 episodes of this season. So aloha, and as ever, I really appreciate your amazing support for the show and for your love of the sport that we all share. So until next week, I'll see you on water.